You mentioned your book a minute ago. You flashed it in front of the screen. Supreme Disorder. Talk to me about the connection between the court and politics.
Sure. Well, I wrote this book in the wake of the confirmation hearings for Brett Kavanaugh. Certainly, I think a low in our political discourse about the court. And I wanted to see, this kind of nastiness, this toxicity that has now enveloped the Supreme Court as much as the rest of our public discourse did not arise with Brett Kavanaugh or the blockade of Merrick Garland or even Robert Bork in the 80s, who famously was rejected by the Senate. It was a big, seen as the beginning of our modern judicial wars. And I wanted to see how exactly all this developed. And it turns out politics has always been part of judicial nominations and confirmations because presidents and senators have always been politicians. George Washington had a nominee to the Supreme Court rejected by the Senate. It starts there. The issues over which politics was fought was certainly different. Whether we're talking about slavery or industrial revolution era regulation, whether we're talking about placating different factions within your party or negotiating with the Senate or feeding public opinion, nominating judges who are on the same party as you, or as in modern times, looking to judicial philosophy. There's different ways that it's gone about, but it's always been there. And I tell that story in my book. What's really changed, and this really the inflection point, I put at 1968, a fateful year in American history for our culture, for our politics generally, but also for our law and for our judicial politics. In that year, LBJ had a Supreme Court nominee filibustered, although he didn't even have a majority support in the Senate. And it was a bipartisan opposition of Abe Fortas's, Justice Fortas's nomination to be Chief Justice. Richard Nixon campaigned against the Warren Court and its activism, arguing for strict constructionism instead. And then a couple of his nominees were then rejected for all sorts of reasons. Judicial philosophy became the thing that we focused on. And there was a ratcheting up, a tit for tat escalation by both parties going back decades. And so what we have now is the culmination of several trends where different interpretive theories map onto partisan preference at a time when the parties are more ideologically sorted and polarized than they've been since at least the Civil War. And so there's no possibility for any sort of compromise. Every vacancy, every nomination to this high court, the one of 9 precious seats, is incredibly fraught. And so we have these titanic battles.